possible to load data into the Lakehouse table section with other aspects as well. Like one of the common aspect that we saw was notebook. And there are other ways as well on how you can upload data within the Lakehouse aspect. It is via upload files into the file section. And from files, you can load data into the table section, and that's only applicable for Parquet files and delimited file. Then there are data pipelines, data flow, and event stream via which you can load data into the Lakehouse. We also saw with respect to how to manage the maintenance of the Lakehouse, which includes optimization. Optimization is wherein we club multiple smaller files into optimized file size Parquet files. And then we saw V order and Z order ways of optimizing how the data is being preserved within the files. And then we saw vacuum. Vacuum is wherein we remove the redundant files that are no longer needed. Now, in case if you vacuum, the time period beyond the vacuum, we won't be able to time travel. Time travel is wherein you can go back into the instance of time and check back the data or the aspect at that particular instance of time. Now, time travel is possible because of the correlationship between the log files, meaning the delta log files, and the corresponding Parquet files. In case of vacuum, the Parquet files are deleted. Thereby, even if the log files are present, we won't be able to get back to that data at that point in the time. Was anyone able to test out the case study with respect to schema change and whether we are able to go back in time with the schema change aspect? If no, then do take today and tomorrow and we'll reconvene on Monday on that aspect. I'll keep that as an open aspect now. Now, one of the case study included that in the corresponding workspace, grant the secondary user that you all had created viewer access. So in this case, I have a secondary user called takeover, correct? And I have provided the secondary user takeover viewer access in this workspace. Now, in case if I log into the secondary user via secondary user, this is my secondary user, account manager for takeover. Now observe what all aspects are being visible at the workspace level. Can you see? For now, I have a warehouse here. And for the corresponding warehouse also, I have a semantic model, but that semantic model is not visible here. Same is the case for lake houses. For lake houses, for every lake house we saw, correct, we get a semantic model, a lake house view, and a SQL Analytics endpoint view. But in case, if a user has been granted viewer access at a workspace level, he or she won't be able to see the semantic model. And then I explicitly grant that user access on that semantic model. So for the viewer user, the semantic model is not visible. The Lakehouse front view, though is visible, the user cannot access it. Meaning, in case if I click on Lakehouse 1 front-end view, I'll get an error stating that you do not have permission to view tables or files in the Lakehouse. But you would be able to access certain features in the SQL Analytics endpoint. Because in case if I have access to the Lakehouse view, there is no control wherein the user would be able to even upload files, and that's the aspect that we want to avoid. That user should just be able to view and not make any changes. Hence, in case of a user having viewer access at the workspace level, he or she won't be able to access, view the semantic model and won't be able to access the Lakehouse view. But in case if I switch over to the SQL Analytics endpoint view, I'll be able to all the data, meaning I'll be able to query the data. So under DBO, I am seeing that there are 3 tables. And in case if I query that table, I'll be able to query that data. DBO.structured1. So a user with a viewer access would only have read-only access on the SQL Analytics endpoint. Now, let me try creating a view. Create view DBO.viewer view as select star from DBO.structured1. So create view permission denied in the database. We saw that in SQL Analytics endpoint view, we could create the user, but that was for user 1 who had complete access at the workspace level. But in case of user 2 who has viewer access at the workspace level, he can only query the data. He cannot create any views, stored procedures, functions, etc. It's a read-only mode that the user would have. This is the SQL Analytics endpoint access that the user with viewer access would have. Any queries up till now?
No, Nandan.
Okay. So now we saw how a workspace level access contributes to the users getting the necessary access within the Lakehouse or not. Now, in case if I associate, let me change user 2 from viewer to contributor access. So now in case if I refresh the access here, I'll be able to see even the semantic models. So viewer is the lowest permission that you all can grant for a user so that he or she only has read-only access. Any access above viewer role, that is the contributor permission, would ensure that that user would be able to modify or make changes. So any queries up till now?
And then viewer can connect to the SSMS and read the data.
See, SQL Analytics endpoint, remember, is like a database. Whichever tools supports you to access the database, you all can access the SQL Analytics endpoint from those tools. It can be from portal, it can be from SSMS, it can be from coding. Clear?
Okay.
As long as you are able to access, the database, SQL Analytics endpoint from any system, from portal, it means you would be able to even access it from any system. Clear?
Clear.
Okay. So now I have reverted it back to the viewer role. So any queries before we move ahead? Okay. Now we saw that. Let me click to the Lakehouse SQL Analytics endpoint. Here we saw the query activity. Correct. Now, there is something called as model layout. In case if I click on the model layout, it gives me the underlying model view of the same, of what all tables are present, etc. Now, in case if I want to create a relationship among these two, there is an option wherein I can, this is like working on the semantic model, wherein in semantic model, you have different tables. So this is the model layout view of the corresponding semantic model. Now, what I can do is I can create a relationship between structure one table and structure duplicate table, wherein I can create manage relationships. I can create a new relationship and I can select the table. I want to create a relationship between structured one and structured two table, duplicate table on C1 column, and it is many to one, the cardinality, meaning this table would have multiple values, duplicate values in C1, but there would be only single value corresponding to that value. And I can click on save. So in this way, I'm creating relationships for better modeling at the report level, because this is the semantic model that is getting created. And it's not just that, I can also ensure that I can hide this corresponding table in the reporting view, meaning those who are trying to access this model layout in the reporting aspect, I can hide this out. So this is the model layout. I'll come to the download SQL project file in some time. Now, in case if I go to the reporting aspect, you all can see there is a default semantic model. Now, the default semantic model is the semantic model that is visible here, which acts as the default one. But imagine that rather than default semantic model, I want to create a new semantic model in itself. So in that case, I can create a new semantic model. I can provide a semantic model name. Then I can select the specific objects that I want to be present in that semantic model. And I can confirm. So what this would do is, corresponding to this lake house, only for the specific set of attributes, or sorry, entities, it would create the respective semantic model on top of the already exist, meaning this default semantic model is still present. It is creating a new semantic model. Now, why would one plan to create a new semantic model? Imagine that if I want, the default semantic model contains all the attributes, and I want certain set of users having access on all the attributes. But I want to provide only certain attributes for certain reporting purpose. I can create a new semantic model, test. Any queries up till now on the concept of semantic model? The basic aspect, that how a lakehouse and a semantic model can be integrated. And then comes the concept of download SQL database project file. Let me download this. It takes certain time to download it. Now it's successfully downloaded. Give me a minute for me to check in my download folders. So now it's in zipped format. So I'll be extracting it. So now I have extracted the data. Now, once I extract the data, this is how it looks like, wherein I'll be able to see the table. If you see, this is the default structure that is present, wherein I have the default semantic model that is imbibed. So if I open this default semantic model, the XMLA version of the code becomes visible, wherein I have structured one table, the corresponding columns, and the partitions, etc., the hierarchies, relationship in case if I have created anything within the semantic model. So this XMLA endpoint, XMLA JSON provides me the XMLA code of the default semantic model. Then there are, if you all see, there is DBO schema. Hence, there is a corresponding DBO folder. Now, within that, though there are different tables, views, functions, stored procedures, why am I able to see only tables and views folder? Because as of now, it's only in the tables and views that I have certain aspect. I have not created anything in stored procedure or function. Since it is blank, it does not create a corresponding folder. So now under tables, I'll be able to see structured one, the definition of the corresponding files. So now in case if I want to open it with a note, edit in Notepad, I'll be able to see the corresponding definition of the you all can see that this was the table definition. Now, if you all remember, I had created a relationship between structured one and structured duplicate. So when I'm creating a relationship, it is like creating a constraint called foreign key, meaning there is a dependency between this table and this table. So just based on the model layout, I was automatically able to change the table definitions as well. So this is your SQL database project. So one can consider this as the code backup of your SQL Analytics endpoint. So once I download the SQL database project, I'll be able to go ahead and integrate it into my Azure DevOps. Now, any queries up till now on the Lakehouse aspect? Now, the only thing that is remaining in the Lakehouse is manage OneLake data access. This aspect we would be discussing once we actually go across the security aspect across the entire fabric. So this is one aspect that we'll keep a hold on to as of now. But is there any query as of now other than this aspect? Before we move to something called as dynamic data masking.
And then can we create the constraint while creating the tables?
Yes.
So it will be visible automatically in the semantic layer, the relationship then? Okay.
So now let's move on to the concept of dynamic data masking. Now, as the name suggests, I want to mask certain data aspects. So it's called an obs. So it's the process of hiding the original data to secure classified information. Now, dynamic data masking is not overriding the underlying data. The underlying data is still preserved as is. It's just that in the front-end view, whenever we are querying the data, during that time, the data is getting masked. So, in such scenarios, now why would one need the concept of dynamic data masking? Because imagine that I have certain sensitive data. Let's take an example that I have an employee table. In there, I have everyone's salary data. Now, should developers have access to the salary data? No, correct. Salary data is a very confidential data at an organization level. So in such cases, one aspect is they do need to have entire access on the table, correct? And unfortunately, Microsoft Fabric does not support column level security. When I say column level security, meaning only give access to specific set of columns and hide other columns. Now that is possible by a concept of creating a view. But for developers need to have access on the entire database. And there is no way wherein I can make sure that specific set of developers should be able to see only these columns in the tables and others should not. That is not possible. And that is what we call as column level security, wherein ensuring that only necessary folks have access to the necessary columns at the tabular level. But that is not supported in the Lakehouse. So in that case, there is an option called dynamic data masking, wherein even though the developer would have access to that column, even if he queries that data on that column, the data would be masked to him, meaning that user who should not have access won't be able to see the actual data, but it would be some scrubbed version of the data. But folks who are admin on the database or should have access to the underlying data, for them, the data would be visible in the original format itself. Hence, the name as dynamic, meaning depending on the corresponding role, the corresponding column would be masked or may not be masked. So it's dynamic. And masking is the process of hiding the original data to secure the classified information. This is what we call as dynamic data masking. And we'll take a look into how that measures across. Now, there are 4 types of dynamic data masking. And remember, this dynamic data masking is not specific to the Fabric Lakehouse SQL Analytics endpoint itself. It's common across all Azure SQL database, Microsoft offerings that include SQL Server 2015 and above, Azure SQL databases, Fabric SQL database, and even Fabric Warehouse. Correct? So, in the subsequent aspects, when I guide you all on Fabric Warehouse, I won't be covering this topic again. I'll just state that Fabric Warehouse also supports dynamic data masking. So let's understand the scope of dynamic data masking now itself. So there are 4 types of dynamic data masking. One is what we call as a default masking. In case of default masking, now those who are familiar with the data types that are present in SQL, you have string data type or what we call as varchar and varchar, etc. So in case of text or string values, you would be able to see x as the value. In case of numerical columns like integer, etc. Now, what is the default value for integer? It's 0. So, in case if I mask a integer column or a numerical column as default, it would give me the default value, that is 0, 0, 0 for all the rows. Similarly, for date time column, the default date is 19000101. So, for all the date, let's take the best example, correct? Your birth date is a PII data. It's a critical data, correct? Based on that, I can identify your age. And you all know, no one likes to say that I'm an aged person, I'm old. So that's a very critical data. So in that case, if I want to mask the date column, I can go ahead and make it a default, wherein for all the rows, the value would be 19000101. That is what we call as the default masking. Now imagine that I do have email column. Like your personal email, while your best example is you all registered to the bootcamp via your personal email IDs, correct? Now that personal email ID got added as guest users within the Active Directory in order for me to share the videos with you all. So in that case, I do have your email data, personal email data, but imagine that I don't want others to have access to that data. So at that time, it would mask the domain name and it would mask the values other than the first value. That is what we call as email masking. Then there are random masking, and it's for numerical columns, wherein I'll say that randomly provide any numbers in the range of 1 to 8, meaning in the, that number of digits, correct? And it would randomly create certain values from those specific numerical range, meaning I am providing an array bound, and within that array bound, I have to provide it with random set of values, and it would be randomly allocated. In random, every time I execute the query, the value would be different since it's randomly getting generated at the runtime itself. And custom string is, it's a partial masking, wherein I'm stating that partially mask all the values other than the initial value and the end value. So in this case, the masked value would be XXXX, and the initial and the last characters would remain as is. So this is what is dynamic data masking. Now, let me go to my SQL Analytics endpoint view. Now, remember, only folks with contributor and above access would be able to mask the data in the table. So, for that, now let me first identify a table in which I want to mask the data. Select all from DBO dot, I guess Titan does DBO dot Titanic. So now, if you all can see, I am having these many columns in the Titanic table. Now what I have done is I have already masked the sex column in the Titanic. Now, how to mask that I'll show eventually. But before that, first I want to explain you all what stands for. Now, if you all remember that I had made the user, okay. Okay. So now I have made the user to viewer access again in the Power BI. Sorry, at the workspace level. So now let me go to the Fabric trial capacity. I'm seeing that the semantic models are no longer visible. Now, in case if I go to the Lakehouse view, I won't be able to see the data, or I won't be able to access the Lakehouse view because it has a viewer access. Now, let me switch over to the SQL Analytics endpoint view. Now, let me execute the SQL query. Select all from DBO.Titanic. Now, if you all see, the sex column is XXXX because the execution that I did was I altered the table and I did a dynamic data masking to the same. Meaning, if I execute this statement, alter table DBO.Titanic, alter column sex, and I've added a masking that add masked with function equal to default. Now, imagine that I want to mask the age column, which is a numerical column, and I want it to be a default value itself. I'll execute this. Now, if I execute this again, since this is the contributor and above role, meaning it has full access on the database, for the user one, the data is visible in its original format itself. I am not able to see any other. I'm not able to see the data in the masked format. But in case if I go back to my user one, and if I execute this, for the age, all the value would be 00000, which is the default value for integer. Similarly, there are different type of masking that we identified, correct? Random, etc. So in case of a random masking, I just have to mention that it be a random from some start range to end range. Meaning, now I have another column called far, correct? So alter table Titanic, alter column far, add masked with function random in the range of this. And if I execute this, now in case if I go back to my original table, the far values are now random in the range of 1 to 12. Now, in case if I try to add a random range on the name column, would it work or would it fail? So now let me alter this and add the random function to the name column. Because random supports numerical data type. Hence, the data, as the data type of the column name is not numerical, that masking won't be supported. So any queries on the concept of masking? So any user who has viewer access on the workspace would only be able to see the data in the mask state. For all other users who are above user role, be it contributor and above, would be able to see the entire data as is. The data won't be masked because the data is getting masked only in the front end view, that is SQL Analytics endpoint view. But in case if the user, if any user tries to access the Lakehouse underlying Parquet file, the data is not actually masked on the Parquet, within the Parquet, correct? It's in the front end layer that I'm getting the data in the masked format. It is because of that viewer folks do not have access to the front end Lakehouse view, because in Lakehouse view, I would be able to access the underlying file that is holding the data, and the masking is not happening on the underlying file. It's at the front end layer itself. So any queries on the concept of dynamic data masking?
Nandan, dynamic data masking can be implemented through SQL endpoint or a Lakehouse endpoint as well.
As I stated, what access is the user having? Viewer access. The dynamic data masking works only on the users who have viewer access.
Yes.
And it's in the viewer. If a person has viewer access, does he have access on the Lakehouse endpoint? No, correct. He only has access on the SQL Analytics endpoint. Correct.
Okay.
And hence the data is getting masked. For any role above viewer role, the Lakehouse endpoint is also visible, and he or she can act as the database admin. So for users with contributor and above role, dynamic data masking won't work. Clear?
Yeah, so contributor can like contributor or members or admin can create data masking using SQL endpoint, okay,
Correct.
or also can create, it can be created using Lakehouse endpoint.
Lakehouse endpoint one cannot create it from there. It can be created only from the SQL Analytics endpoint.
Okay, that was my question. Okay.
Were you able to create any table, execute any SQL queries from the Lakehouse endpoint? No, correct? Just for Parquet and CSV files that you were able to create table. But other than that, was there any direct way from the Lakehouse point that you could create anything? No. It's either via notebooks that you are able to execute the queries, correct? Via PySQL,
Yeah, notebook using
Spark
notebook.
SQL. So you have to connect to the database from some third-party tool or from this portal, and you can execute the queries. So you need the SQLantics endpoint view to execute the dynamic data masking aspect. Any queries? Any other queries? No? Then this concludes the concept of dynamic data masking. And this concept is same across Microsoft databases, be it Azure SQL database, Science dedicated pool, or components within Fabric like Fabric Warehouse, Fabric SQL database, etc. The underlying concept remains the same and the syntax, everything are the same. So I won't be covering this again in the subsequent sessions. Now, coming to the main aspect, the final aspect of the Lakehouse, that is shortcuts. Now, can someone remind me what is a shortcut?
Pointer.
Pointer reference.
It's a pointer, yeah.
It's a virtually referencing something into the corresponding Fabric ecosystem. So now, for that, let me open another workspace. So delete trial capacity. Okay, let me go to my optimization workspace. In that, I have a Lakehouse lake. Now, imagine that these are two workspaces, correct? This is present in the optimization workspace, and this is present in the delete trial capacity workspace, this lake houses and this warehouses, let's consider. Now imagine that rather than physically loading the data from this lakehouse type, in Lakehouse 1, there was a table called Titanic. I need that similar data in another workspace. Now, one way is I can physically copy the data from this lakehouse into this lakehouse. But then, since both the workspaces underlying source is the one lake, the data is getting duplicated in the one lake at a tenant level, which can be avoided. So for that, there is a concept called shortcuts. Now, how to create a shortcut? Now, shortcut can be created at the file level or at the table level, and I'll explain how it differs. So now let me go ahead and create a shortcut. Now, shortcut supports two aspects. One is internal sources, meaning anything within the Microsoft One Lake that includes Lakehouse, Fabric, warehouses, etc. And it supports external sources like Amazon S3 Bucket, Amazon S3 compatible, Azure Data Lake Storage, Google Cloud Storage, Azure Blob Storage, and Dataverse. So for now, in today's session, we would be focusing on creating shortcuts via the internal source only. So now let me click on the corresponding One Lake aspect here. Now here, you all can see, correct? I can create shortcut to any data aspect that is present within the One Lake. It includes lake houses, warehouses, databases, etc. Now, I want to access the data that is present in the delete trial capacity Lakehouse 1. So I'll select this Lakehouse 1. Now, I want to create shortcut of what? Do I want to create shortcut of the table within the Lakehouse 1 or files within the Lakehouse 1? For now, I want to create, since I have selected the table here, I'll be creating the table aspect. So now I'll be clicking on the Titanic. I want to read the Titanic data from the Lakehouse 1 into this Lakehouse. And I'll click on next. Now, I can provide this a name. I can update the name. I can provide it as Titanic underscore shortcut or some user defined name that you all would be comfortable with, in case if you all have standard naming conventions that you all want to define across an organization. So I'll save this and then I'll click on create. Now the shortcut is getting created. Now let's observe the symbol difference here. If you all see, the test table that is present here is the actual delta table that is present within this lakehouse. Whereas the Titanic shortcut that you all Titanic shortcut table that you all are seeing here, can you see a symbol at the top? It's like it's a reference. So this symbol represents that this table is a shortcut and not an actual table within the corresponding lakehouse. So this is another way of how you can identify the shortcut that is present within the corresponding lakehouse by the visualization aspect. Now, let me click on this Titanic shortcut. Now, the underlying data that is present in this lakehouse would become visible here to us. I can see, correct, Titanic shortcut. And now in case if I click on view files, I can still see the file because it is providing me the location of the file, that location where the file is originally present within the one lake. Now how to check that? If I click on these three ellipses, if I click on that ellipsis, I can go and check the property. You all can see that this is the shortcut property and this is shortcut type one lake, and I can check the URL of the corresponding aspect and the relative path that it is mapping to. So, and we'll check across what does ABFS path mean, absolute path, etc. eventually once we cover the concept of notebooks. But for now, here we can see that it's a shortcut aspect. Now let's compare the difference between the property of the shortcut and the property of the original table that is present here. Can you see? This is the property of the original table, whereas this is the property of a shortcut table. So in case if you all want to identify whether the corresponding table is a shortcut or not, you can either validate the symbol that is present besides that table name, or you can check its corresponding properties via which you all would be able to identify whether the shortcut is present or not, whether it's a shortcut or not. Now, let me go to the SQL Analytics endpoint view. This table be visible in the SQL Analytics endpoint view? Any guess? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, it should be.
It is visible. But since this is a SQL Analytics endpoint view, here we do not have the bifurcation, because for SQL Analytics endpoint view, it's a table itself. Someone had a question, correct? Why is it not showing delta aspect? Because
Yes,
SQL
I
Analytics
have.
endpoint view is a read-only front-end aspect, and there is no way to bifurcate whether the tables that are present here are shortcut or actual delta tables. It's only in the lakehouse view that one would be able to identify that. Any queries? Now, let me do select all from information underscore schema dot tables, the underlying metadata table. So, since this is collation, case sensitive, I had to use. Now let's check the property of this table. If you see, I have two base tables. So it's creating the shortcut even as a base table. Now, if I do select all from dbo.titanic shortcut, I'll be able to query that data. Now the question comes, if a user, okay, now let's take one step back. Any queries up till on the concept of shortcut up till now? Team, let's be vocal so that I understand, because this is one of the critical aspects. Shortcuts helps us ensure that the data governance is proper within the organization rather than duplicating the data. And depending on shortcut, there are multiple other aspects that you all would understand in the data engineering world. So is the concept of shortcut clear?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So now coming to the next aspect, that is, I created a shortcut. Now let's do some trial and error with respect to user 2 who had viewer access, correct? So now in the delete trial capacity, what I have done, I have two workspaces. I have delete trial capacity workspace and I have an optimization workspace. I have lakehouse in both the workspaces and I'm trying to reference the data that is present in the lakehouse one within delete trial capacity into a lakehouse which is present in the optimization workspace. Now, under manage access, let me remove this viewer's access. And let me grant this viewer access on the optimization workspace. And let me provide him contributor access. So, takeover is my username. And let me provide him member access within this workspace. Now, let me switch to that user. Now, since even though I revoked his access, user wants access from the workspace, why am I able to execute the SQL Analytics endpoint? Because it's the cache. Eventually, after some time, the corresponding access would move over. It takes some cache for it to clean up. But for now, under workspaces, I can see that the delete trial is not available. And now if you see, I'm not able to load the SQL Analytics endpoint because I had removed its access. So it was the cache that was visible before. Now, once I refresh the page, I'm able to see that that access has been revoked. Now I have full access on the optimization workspace. And here, let me go to the lakehouse, lake. Since I had provided him or her member access, the user to member access, I'm able to see the data here. But can you see here? I'm getting this error. Couldn't load column details. And if I click on this, I'm able to see the data. But I'm able to get this aspect that, okay. Or now let me switch over to the SQL Index endpoint view. Select all from dbo.titanic shortcut. I am able to see the data. So, what does this imply? And is this correct? Let's take one step back of what I'm trying to ask. My question is, when we created a shortcut, does the shortcut get created from the user who created that shortcut? And any user who has access to this shortcut would be able to access the underlying data? Is that the case?
No, he will need access.
Then, okay, then why am I able to query the data? We saw, correct? I revoked takeover's access from the corresponding workspace and the lakehouse, the underlying source workspace, source lakehouse. Then why am I still able to query the data here or see the data in the lakehouse view as well? But here I'm getting that server error. But that same access, if I go ahead in this account, I'm not able to see such server access.
Yeah, interesting. No idea.
Any queries? Okay. See, here I'm not able to see that error message, but I'm able to see the underlying data. But there all in the viewer 2 or the user 2, I'm getting this error, but I'm able to see the underlying data. Any thoughts? Now, let's do some other proof of concept here. Correct? So as of now, we created a shortcut in this link. Correct? Now, let me try creating a shortcut via this account. Because now this has member access, correct? So let me create a new shortcut. Microsoft OneLake. Can you see the options here are very limited when I'm trying to create a shortcut from user 2? Because user 2 has access on only these objects within OneLake. Whereas if I go and try to create a shortcut here within Microsoft OneLake, I'm able to see so many options here. So one thing that we all can state that shortcuts can be created by the users only if they have the necessary access, that is member and above, within the lakehouse, and shortcuts can be created to the sources to which he or she has access to within the lake. Since user 2 didn't have access to multiple workspaces and only specific workspaces, for him or for that account, there were only specific limited objects that were visible. But since user 1 is having access on so many objects within this OneLake, KQL database, warehouses, etc., I am able to see all the options. So now let me go ahead and create a shortcut to some another workspace. Let's say Fabric Trial. Let me order it by that workspace. Okay. So let me order it by, let's say, I have a Fabric Trial. I have a warehouse, correct? So now let me select this warehouse. Now within the warehouse, there would be multiple tables. I can select the specific table from the warehouse that I want to map it to. So now I am trying to access. Okay, this. Okay. Now another question, correct? I already have a table test in the lakehouse. Can I create a shortcut to this test table in the lakehouse, or would there be a conflict stating that a same table name exists? You all understood the query? So I already have a physical delta table within this lakehouse and as test. Now I have a test table in my Fabric warehouse in some another workspace. Can I create a shortcut within this lake house to a source with the same name as test? Yes
we
or
can.
no?
Yes, we can.
Okay. First of all, I can edit the name as well. Correct. But now let's try creating it. So can you? Yes, you can. But Microsoft, if you all remember, understand the base concept that we were executing, correct? I executed information underscore schema dot tables, correct? I cannot have two table names, two tables with the similar name. It's a conflict because the table name must be unique. A schema name and a table name combination must be unique. So what Microsoft does is, in case if I am not renaming it while creating the shortcut, it automatically appends underscore underscore two a new name. Similar to when you're trying to save a copy of the file, or if you download similar file, it appends 1, 2, 3. Correct? Similar concept is being followed here as well. Now, if I click on this test 1, I'll be able to see the underlying data. It's an empty table, hence I'm not able to see any data. Now, let me go ahead to here and let me refresh this page. Can you see test 1? It's throwing me an error in the couldn't load column details. Whereas I'm able to see the underlying data. So I'll give this POC to you. So does that mean that anyone who has access to the workspace in which I have created a shortcut to the another workspace wherein the user does not have access, he or she can bypass that data? Or shouldn't the authentication be based on the user who's trying to query the data? Because here I'm seeing some error. Because the user does not have access to the underlying source. Hence, it is throwing me an error here with the error symbol. But is this enough? Shouldn't the data also have been filtered out while querying the data? And if you see, I cannot go and check the underlying file view for the Titanic shortcut that I am able to do here, wherein I am able to see the underlying file that is present here. But when I execute, I process the same, I am able to see that user is not authorized to access the file in the storage path because the user does not have access to that workspace or that lakehouse. Then why am I able to see the data? Any queries? This would be a query, and I expect you all to go across, test out this with your own aspect and come up whether this is an issue of cache or this is a bug in Microsoft or this is an expected scenario. According to you all, should the user 2 who does not have access to the source data be able to query the shortcut to the source data? Yes or no? Based on your normal concept of data governance. If I do not have access to the source data, even if I create a shortcut, should other users who do not have access to that data be able to access that data or not in normal conceptual way? Yes or no?
No.
No, correct.
No.
If that is the case, then what I'm seeing here, is this a case of cache? Because earlier granted that user viewer access on that workspace and that cache is still left and it takes time to clear it out? Or is it a bug, or is it expected? Or that's what Microsoft has done, wherein rather than using the authentication of the user who is executing the query, it is taking the authentication of the user who created the shortcut. What it is? Give some thought behind that. I'll keep this as an open discussion for us for our next session. Is it clear? So other than this confusing aspect that I brought, any queries on the concept of shortcut at the internal aspect? I have yet to discuss on the external aspect. Okay. Now I can create shortcuts. Let me create a shortcut in the table. Now let me create a shortcut to my Lakehouse 1 and let me select a file. In this case, let me select a file that I want. Correct? Okay, see, is there an option to select a specific file here? I have multiple files. Correct? I'm unable to select. If I want to create a shortcut to a specific file, I'm unable to select that specific file. Shortcut at the file level can be created at a folder level. Hence, if I want a specific file to be present, I need to move it to a specific folder itself. So now, in the unstructured, I have two aspects, correct? So now let me select the structured file folder and create a shortcut to it. Now, can you see this unidentified folder? So what happens is it initially tries to identify whether I can create a shortcut or not. When I create a shortcut, it expects that the underlying data is in the form of delta parquet in the table section. But since the data is not in the form of delta parquet, it is trying to create a shortcut. But since those are files, it is unable to create it properly. And hence, it's in the unidentified section. And we'll see. Can you see? It tried creating the structured aspect within the tables, but it wasn't able to create. And hence, it is under the unidentified section. Because I'm unable to identify these objects as tables. To keep these objects in the lakehouse, I have to move them to the file section of the lakehouse because these are underlying files, not in delta parquet. They're a mixed set of files. So now I have to move this to the file section. And now able to access the files that are present within this file section of the Lakehouse 1. And now, if I go and refresh this page, now isn't it confusing? I am able to see that the structure table, sorry, the folder that I created, correct? The shortcut that I created to the file section from the original source, Lakehouse, wherein this user 2 does not have access. Unlike user 2, sorry, unlike user 1, wherein the user 1 who created this shortcut, who had access to the underlying Lakehouse, is able to go across this shortcut folder and able to see all the files that are present. I can even click on the Parquet file and check the corresponding data. But the same when I'm trying to access it from the corresponding U2, here I'm not able to see the files. And I'm getting that And if I click on this error, user is not authorized, which is correct. But then if I click on the tables, it is showing me data. Little bit confusing, correct? In one case, it is showing me the data, even though it does not have access to it. And in another case, it is not showing me any data. So which is it? Is it a bug? Is it a cache? Or is it expected? Or is it another fourth scenario, that is shortcut in table section has some another form of authentication, and shortcut in file section has another form of authentication. I'll keep this bug in your thoughts for our next session. Do give some thought and do try to research something behind this. Correct? Any queries in the aspect here? Yes or no?
No, Nandan.
No.
Now,
No.
let me go to this lake house. Correct? And create another folder. Now, in the structured folder, let me upload a Parquet file. Let me first download this Parquet file, Titanic Parquet. But can I download it? No, correct. That's what we had seen, correct? You cannot download anything from the portal view. So for now, what I'll do is, I already have that file from my local system. I'll upload it. Now, how to upload it? Within files, I can click on get data and upload files. So here I'll upload the file that I have called Titanic Parquet, and I'll upload it. So the file is getting uploaded. In case if I click on this file, I'll be able to see the underlying data. Now let me try to create a shortcut in the table section to that Lakehouse 1 under file section under Parquet. Now the question is, since it's a Parquet format that is familiar with Microsoft Fabric, would it create a shortcut in the table section or would it still create a shortcut in the file section?
Table section.
Okay, what about others?
Table section only, Nandan.
Because it needs a Delta Parquet file format. Underlying data should be in the form of Delta Parquet for it to be in the table section. But since the underlying data is Parquet, it is not able to identify it. Hence, I have to move it to file sections. On this concept, that there is some other concepts that happen with respect to external aspect that we would cover eventually. So now, any queries on the shortcut within Microsoft OneLake aspect or internal shortcuts? Except for the question that I put to you all, correct? That how is it that a user is not able to access the shortcut in the file section? Let me log into app.powerbi for that user. Open the optimization workspace and open the Lakehouse. Now I am able to see the two additional aspects, that is par for this and this. I am not able to see the data. Here also it's showing me an error, but in case if I click on this, I'm able to see the data. So do give a thought behind this confusing aspect, and we can discuss or meet back on Monday or Tuesday on this concept. So now we saw that shortcut helps a user or business read data across multiple workspaces without the need of having the data to be physically replicated or duplicated in another workspace. This is what we call as shortcuts. Now, shortcuts are supported at a table level and at a file level as well, depending on what type of shortcut one is trying to create. If the underlying data is just a file, then it cannot be created in the table section. It has to be created in the file section. And that's what we'll see eventually once we try to work across the next concept of external shortcuts. So let me log into my Azure portal. Let me check. Now remember, some of you all had reached out to me with respect to cost. If you see, I have 2 subscriptions, correct? My current cost across these subscriptions have been 3,655 and 2,500, and I have only 699 present, and that is present in Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. My current cost is 11,000, and for that I have 6,000 credit remaining under Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. So now under Visual Studio, let me go to my resource groups. Let me filter on Visual Studio Enterprise subscription and deleted aspect. Let me create an Azure Blob Storage that we already have, correct? I already have a storage account that is created. Now within this storage account, let me create a hierarchy, something called a container. Now container is shortcut. Now within that, let me upload a file. So now let me go and upload some files. I'll select a Parquet file. I'll select a JSON file. I'll select an Excel file. If you all can see, I am uploading an Excel file, a Parquet file, and a JSON file. Azure Blob Storage, as I stated, is like an Azure a data lake wherein you can have structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. So now let's focus on the shortcut aspect now. Now, since this is a file, I want to create a shortcut to that file. So let me create a new shortcut, or let me try creating a shortcut in the tables that would automatically redirect it to the file section eventually. Now let's focus on the external sources. Let me select an Azure Blob Storage. First aspect is I am trying to connect to an external source. To connect to an external source, I would need to provide that external source details, correct? The details would be the account name, the authentication name, authentication type, and some credentials. So for that, let me click on create a new connection. Now here it is asking me to provide the storage account name. The storage account name is delete storage account demo. Now this is a new connection that I'm creating for the first time. Hence it is showing us create new connection. Now there are different forms of authentication that is supported. account key, organizational account. Organizational account meaning the account via which it has access to shared access or service principal. And I can even use Key Vault to integrate the corresponding key value rather than manually providing it. For organizational account, I have to just sign in. But in this case, let me use an account key. Account key meaning basically to a storage account, it's not similar to the Azure Key Vault key. Account key is like the credential of the storage account. And where do I get that? It would be under access keys. So under access key section, under key, I can copy this value and I can provide it here. Now I can provide the name that I want, correct? Shortcut storage account. And I'll click on next. So now it is trying to establish a connection from the Fabric portal to that storage account and trying to create a connection to that. So now the connection got created. Now when I created that connection, it went into the storage account, and inside the storage account, it saw that there is only one container called shortcut. Hence, I am able to see only one bucket or directory. Now, the container can be considered similar to as folder within the file section in the Lakehouse. And can I create a shortcut at a file level? No, it is at a folder level. Hence, the folder is container within storage account. So I'll be able to select I have to select the container and then I'll create a shortcut. Now the shortcut won't be created under table section because it's a file. Correct. Hence, it would now fail and it would tell me to move it into the file section. By the time this is happening, Microsoft provides creating shortcuts to external sources as well, like Azure Data Lake Storage, Dataverse. These are Microsoft components only. But these are Microsoft components that are not present within the Fabric ecosystem. Azure Data Lake Storage, Azure Blob Storage is present in Microsoft Azure ecosystem. Dataverse, I'm not sure. For those who are familiar, Microsoft has another offering called Power Platform. Now, Power Platform contains multiple other offerings like Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, etc. So, or Microsoft Dynamics 365. So, Power Platform is another major ecosystem of Microsoft. Microsoft Fabric is another ecosystem, and both of them are in silos. There is no connectivity between them. One can consider Dataverse as the underlying database of the Power Platform ecosystem. And Microsoft Fabric is basically your data analytical platform for an organization. So in order, and if Dataverse is your database of your Power Platform, wouldn't analytical team have the to analyze that Dataverse data or that data of the Power Platform? So for that, one can create shortcuts to the Dataverse. And these are Amazon AWS Cloud, and this is Google Cloud. So one can connect to external systems that are not part of Fabric ecosystem via the concept of shortcuts. As of today, these are generally available and this is in public preview. So now I can see that it didn't create it. So it's asking me to move the objects to the file section. And now in case if I click on the corresponding shortcut, I'm able to see the corresponding set of files that are present in the storage account. And I can even access the file. But now let me go to the viewer 1 access. Viewer 2 access. In viewer 2, structured, I am not able to see. Parquet, I am not able to see because those were created for folders or files within Microsoft OneLake. Now let me click on shortcut folder. I am able to see the files and I am even able to see the data in the shortcut folder that I created to the Azure Blob Storage. A little more confusing now, correct? But I like you all to think across for next 1.5 to 2 days as to how is it that certain shortcuts in files are working and certain shortcut in files are not working. And how is it that I'm able to see the error symbol, but I'm able to access the underlying data in the shortcut, even if this account does not have access to the underlying data. So I leave you all with these open questions for this weekend. But any queries other than this on the shortcut? Now, you all saw that one difference between creating shortcut to Microsoft internal ecosystem, meaning objects that are present in OneLake. I never needed the option to create a connection. Whereas whenever I try to create a shortcut to some external source, it would ask me to provide a connection to it. To which external source do I want to connect to? Since I already have created connections to Dataverse, I can go and create a connection to the Dataverse. So, any queries up till now on the concept of shortcuts? Yes or no?
No.
No, Randan.
Now, I have so many shortcuts that are present in this workspace or in this lakehouse, correct? Now, in case if you go under settings of the lakehouse and go to shortcut connections, this provides us basically all connections that are present for external systems. Since now I created a connection to Azure Blob Storage, I'm able to see this connection here. For internal aspect, there was no need for me to create any connection. Hence, those are not visible here. So as long as I create multiple connections to external systems or shortcuts to external systems, I'm able to see the shortcut connections here. So now let me go ahead and create a new shortcut to Dataverse. I already had an existing connection to Dataverse. I won't bug you with how to create a connection, etc. to that. Now, if you see, I'm able to see so many data here. Correct. Let me select one of the table. Click on next and let me create a shortcut. So now, can you see when I click on this shortcut, underlying it contains Delta and Parquet files. Correct, for this table in the Dataverse. So does that mean I can create this shortcut to the corresponding table section? Let's try it out. Let me create a new shortcut again to the Dataverse. Let me select the Dataverse connection. Let me select global option set metadata. Let me select some other status metadata. Let me click on create. Now you all see shortcut got created, but it directly got created in the table section itself. It is because the underlying data of the shortcut that I created is in the form of Delta Parquet file. Microsoft supports creating shortcuts in the table sections if your underlying data is in the form of Delta Parquet, because that is how Microsoft Fabric preserves the underlying data of the tables in the form of Delta Parquet. So in order for you to reference a shortcut in the table section, the underlying source data must be in the form of Delta Parquet only. It cannot be in any other format, not even simple Parquet, which we saw. Is it clear now? See, eventually we are deep diving into the concept of shortcuts, correct? We started with a simple shortcut to a table. But then we had multiple question marks with respect to the authentication aspect that we have yet kept it as a question mark. Then we created shortcuts in the table section, but to files that are not Delta Parquet. So it stated that it has to be moved to the file section. So now I'm able to access those files from the shortcuts in the file section. But in case if your underlying data is in the form of Delta Parquet, I can create shortcuts in the table section as well. Let's validate. In case if I check view files, I can see that the underlying files are in the form of Delta Parquet itself. Now, in case if I click on setting and into the shortcut connections, I can see that this workspace is leveraging two shortcut. This Lakehouse is leveraging two shortcut connection. One is the Dataverse and another is Azure Blob Storage. And I have one shortcut from the Azure Blob Storage and two shortcuts from this Dataverse. It is this data that is being visible in the settings section of the Lakehouse. Any queries on the concept of shortcuts? So, any queries, team? So today I won't complete adding more case study. I had a plan to provide case study on you all creating two users, shortcuts with different set files, tables, etc. And the Azure Blob Storage that we had created, I wanted you all to test that out. But for now, since you all have yet not cleared your previous case studies, do try to complete those in next 2 days, and then we can work on the future case studies.